Krypton's core is collapsing. We may only have a matter of weeks. I warned you. Look to the stars. Like our ancestors did. There are habitable worlds within reach. There's still hope.
Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Kryptonian Collection, the show where our venerated Council of El will gather to discuss, argue, and finally vote on whether a movie should be granted entrance into the illustrious Kryptonian Collection, a list of our greatest films that our meager little planet has to offer. My name is Scott Daly, your host and permanent member of the Council, and joining me today is my co-host and fellow permanent Council member, Matt Freeman. Matt, how's it going?
I'm good, Scott. Also joining us as temporary Council member this episode is Michael.
Hey,
hello.
Michael. Hey, Michael. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
All right, Matt, before we introduce our challenger for this month, why don't you go over the rules real quick?
It would be my pleasure. Each month, the Council will convene to consider the entry of another film into the collection. The challenger will put forth his or her movie for nomination and an argument for including it. The Council and our challenger will then discuss the film in detail, including its merits and flaws. Once this discussion is complete, a vote will be taken. Each of the three members of the Council gets one vote, and if the film receives at least 2 yes votes, it is entered into the collection. At this point, the challenger would also be awarded the third seat on the Council, kicking Michael off and taking his place. The challenger would then join us next month and get a deciding vote in that month's film. If, however, this week's film does not get the required 2 votes, it is rejected and forever banned from consideration. The challenger, of course, is welcome to come back in a few months' time and put forth a different film for consideration. And speaking of that challenger, who appears before the Council this month?
We have film critic Dede Crimmins. Dede, welcome to the show.
Oh, hi. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, of course. Why don't you, before we introduce your movie, tell us a little about yourself. You write for several websites, right?
Yeah. I freelance around wherever I can. I'm a regular contributor to Birth Movies Death, as well as Remorgue Magazine, which is an awesome horror magazine. And I'm technically a staff writer for filmthrills.com.
Awesome. Guys, there's a real film critic on our show. Like a real one.
Yeah, awesome.
Like not a pretend kinds.
I think we've made it.
Yeah, that's how it works, right? It's by association.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how I got here.
All right,
Dede, tell us what movie you've brought forth, and then tell us a little bit about it and why you nominated it.
Okay, so I'm bringing forth first thing that came to mind, which is George Romero's 1968 Night of the Living Dead. The original zombie film, even though it doesn't call them zombies for all intents and purposes, that's what they are. In terms of my own personal experience with this film, and I know you know this, Scott, but Michael and Matt, you do not. I actually wrote my master's thesis on George Romero. I have been flown to academic conferences specifically to discuss this film and its merits amongst horror history. So it's an incredibly important film in terms of not only horror, but also guerrilla filmmaking, representations of the Vietnam War on screen. Like, we can get into this as deep as we want to. But when it comes down to it, this film still holds up as a terrifying film. And it just really works, and it really gets down to your bones as to exactly what is human.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a nutshell.
Like, when I invited you onto this podcast, I was kind of hoping you were going to pick this movie, like, or at least I was hoping you were going to pick a Romero movie in general, because I think it's just a great thing to listen to you talk about. So I'm very glad you selected this movie, and I'm really excited to talk about it. And if any of us have anything bad to say, being immediately told we're wrong.
No, I mean, just because I love it doesn't mean it isn't perfect. Like, it sounds like we're going to get into that at a certain point. Like, there definitely isn't a perfect film. And if we want to get into Romero a little bit, he's like Newtonian physics. Like, for every Romero quote, there's an equal and opposite Romero quote. Like, he contradicts himself constantly in interviews. Like, you can't really believe a single thing that guy ever said, which makes it really hard to dissect the film into how intended all of the outcomes were, but it's still a fascinating thing to study.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree.
I'm glad you chose this movie too, because I'd never seen it before, but I was aware of its sort of it as being the first zombie movie, And I do really like the idea of zombie movies, so it was good that I had the excuse to watch it finally.
Yeah, so I think that's a good segue, Michael. Why don't you give your opening thoughts? You said you had never seen the movie before. How have you seen Romero? Like, is it just you've seen other Romero movies, or is this your first George Romero film?
It might have been my first Romero film. Maybe there's something that I didn't know he directed. But I haven't seen any in this series. Like, I haven't seen Dawn of the Dead or anything like that.
Okay. Well, so what'd you think of the movie overall? What'd you think of Night of the Living Dead?
I thought it was pretty good for the time period, especially. I mean, it was really corny in parts. And I texted you in the middle, and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm so tired of this white bitch." When Barbara was just like being hysterical the whole, for the first 30 minutes or whatever, until she kind of gets knocked out by Ben. And that's when I started getting interesting, because Ben was a much more, I mean, he's obviously like the hero of the story, but he was a much more relatable character than Barbara's just running around screaming. But I liked I recognized the like trapped in a farmhouse thing, which I think has been used in zombie works since. That's a setting in my favorite zombie work, which is the Walking Dead video game by Telltale Games, and other zombie things. And it's a cool. I like survival stories, and it was cool to have them kind of like being holed up in the farmhouse and doing various things to, try to escape when they tried to go out and fill up the car with gas and stuff like that. And I thought it was a good story. I was really surprised by the amount of graphic violence in like the ghouls, as they were called, or zombies, so I guess we would call them now, like actually eating like intestines and bones and crap. Yeah. I suspect that was particularly, shocking in 1968, which we kind of brought up earlier. Ebert's original review, where that was the thing he focused on, was how violent it was.
Yeah, and I think we're definitely going to explore that as we go through it. Cool. Matt, how about you? Had you seen this film before?
No, I hadn't. I was trying to determine whether I'd seen any Romero films while Michael was talking, and I haven't succeeded in determining that at this point, because he's directed a lot. But yeah, this was really interesting. It was really interesting to see how there were so many of the things that you recognize as tropes of any kind of zombie story, whatsoever, right. And it's so many of them. It's obvious in a good way that they came from this film, because this film is sort of. This is going to sound like a negative, but it's like fumbling its way into these tropes. And it's like in later movies, you can see them, honed and sharpened to perfection in some cases, and in other cases just sort of used lazily without even understanding of why they're there. Whereas this movie, all the elements are intentional, because they're basically walking through the scenario and coming up with these things for the first time, and it's fun to watch for that reason. I mean, there were definitely some rough bits. There was a certain point when like two characters in a row give a long meandering soliloquy, and I was just kind of like thinking, when this movie came out, was this like an intentionally retro touch, or was this actually what movies were like at the time? Because that's one thing, is I don't have a good sense of like what movies came out when exactly that would let me say, oh no, this is fairly typical for this period of time, versus like for example, the film is in black and white. Was that a choice, or was that because movies were in black and white at the time?
From my understanding, it's because they didn't have a very big budget.
I have so much to say on this topic, you guys.
Good. Okay.
Let me know when we want to get into it, because I don't know if you're still doing your intro, but I have a lot to say on that.
Go ahead. Yeah. What talk about the black and white?
Okay, so the black and white, it mostly was a decision on budget, because it was incredibly cheap in 1968 to do black and white versus color, because they were still, of course, doing it only on 35. To put it in the greater context, I always like to compare and contrast this with Rosemary's Baby, because they both came out in 1968. Rosemary's Baby has very high profile actors and actresses in it, high profile director. It's gorgeous and in color. It's polished, has an amazing score. That's what audiences were expecting when they went to go see horror films. Seeing this, honestly, it looked like guerrilla cinema. You need to think of this as this was the Blair Witch of the era. None of the actors and actresses were recognizable, to the point where they didn't know if this was actually happening. Like, it had almost War of the Worlds style news announcements throughout it. Mm-hmm. Like, people saw it, and it's not intended to be shown as like reality, but it's shown to be realistic and really gritty. All of that is intentional on Romero's part.
Yeah, and there was something, like, I've seen this movie probably half a dozen times throughout my life, but this recent rewatch really made me notice just how much of, like, the 50s sci-fi-esque style comes through a little bit. Like, it's very easy to watch this movie not knowing that it came out in 1968 and think this is like a War of the Worlds-esque older black and white science fiction story, but it's not. But it has that feeling to it, absolutely. And I think that's part of the guerrilla filmmaking nature of it.
Yeah, and also to put it in greater contextualization in terms of how, the end shot where you see them, this is after Ben's been shot, his body's dragged out to the pyre, and he's just set on flame with all the rest of the dead bodies they've been collecting.
Spoilers.
That footage is shaky cam. It's just a field that's burning. This looks exactly like Vietnam War era footage, and it was intentionally so. This was supposed to be people looking at that being like, wait, is this what we're doing abroad? Is this what's happening here? Like, it is very much so. This is when people left the theater, even though no one went to see it in the theater initially, we can talk about that too. But if someone left the theater and went home and turned on the news, it would look exactly the same.
Yeah. So, yeah. I think that's one of the coolest things about this movie. And I think, like, it sets the tone for zombie movies to be this look at ourselves and this look at culture at the time and what's going on in the world at the time, and the zombies are never the important part of the movie. They're just the action that causes these things to happen, and that's what I really liked, that here in this first zombie movie we're seeing that, where absolutely it is dealing with cultural issues, dealing with Vietnam. I mean, the main character of this movie is a black guy, and I know that Romero said, but as you said, Dede, I'm sure he contradicted himself, but originally he said that he did not intentionally cast a black person for this role to make any kind of statement, but it also definitely does.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you, but Romero has given interviews where he said he just took the best actor he would get at that price, essentially. But he's also given interviews where he talks about the importance of it not being a white guy savior, and the importance of the white posse shooting a black man when he's doing no wrong. So,
right.
It goes either way with that guy.
He was definitely the best actor, I would say, as well.
Yeah. What I thought was interesting about his character is, like, he's not really a savior. Like, he's the most competent, but he's very morally gray. Like, he punches the woman out. He murders the other man who yes was going to betray him, but in sort of like an understandable way that you can imagine yourself doing out of cowardice and terror.
Right.
And
certainly not what you would expect the hero to do.
Yeah, like he's definitely not the leading man hero who guides everyone through the movie and then they all escape. So I thought that was very interesting because, again, I'm more used to seeing like derivatives of this movie where the main character is this paragon, or at least he gets to make like a noble sacrifice. This wasn't even a noble sacrifice. This was just a tragic, everyone dies ending.
Yeah.
I think his like harsh rationality was one of the things that got me into this movie, because before he showed up and started doing practical things, it seemed like it was going to be this incredibly corny, like, oh, there's zombies, kind of movie, and he made it seem a lot more realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about what you said, Matt, a little bit about how this kind of like the tropes that we see in zombie movies so often are all over this film, and I was kind of shocked when I was you have the teen couple, you have the married couple with a kid, and then the guy the man in that couple usually turns out to be the traitorous asshole. Like these are
the kid that turns into a zombie.
Yeah. Like these are zombie movie tropes we've seen again and again and again.
Well,
and it's
even somebody getting bitten and turning into a zombie, and like little things. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's the fact, like, what's the one where they're stuck in the mall? Is that just like the remake of this movie?
Well,
so basically,
Dawn of the Dead. Sorry, yeah.
Is that Romero, or is that just a coincidence?
That's Romero.
There was a Romero one. You might be thinking of the Zack Snyder remake of the Romero film.
Whichever one I'm talking about, I think that I saw it in theater with you, Scott. So
then, the Zack Snyder one, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah, but
and all the rules for killing zombies too, like shoot them in the brain. They're weak to fire. And they're a traditional slow crawl zombie.
And it's interesting because, like, I guess you would think that these rules would be like something that like slowly coalesced over the course of the genre being developed. But it just very much surprised me how much of this seemed to be, or like it was in this movie, and they took all these tropes or these things, these part of this movie, and they carried that forward wholesale. And I mean, a lot of that's Romero. He was kind of dictating what the genre looked like to begin with, but it's just like not too much has changed. I mean, there's zombie movies now that explore different things and do different things with it. And Dede, maybe near the end of this, we can get into the whole zombie versus like infection, that kind of thing. But I was very impressed that like you could see everything that would be in a modern zombie movie in this thing. And of course, this was the first time it was done. It was cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, while we're still talking about zombies, I want to say one thing I liked about this that I don't know if it was because of the contrast or what, but in most of the zombie movies I'm familiar with, the zombies, they're played by actors who are essentially enacting like some kind of insane rage. And these zombies are like, I don't know what Romero told them, but like it would make sense to me if he told them, act like the people are just like meat and you're just pretty hungry. And that was like way more disturbing to me to watch them like, reaching for the people and just sort of being very insistent, but not being angry, not being insane rage zombies, just being like implacable. And like that was, it was really interesting to me that this movie was like more disturbing to me than 28 Days Later, in that particular way.
Well, and they use tools, and they like you see them eat bugs. Like there's the one when the zombie like walks up to the tree, I think, and just grabs like a bug off the tree and eats it. And so it's like they're just people that want to eat everything. And it's like, there's something very disturbing about that like there's some humanity behind it. And the thing that shocked me going through this was how quickly they stop referring to them as humans in this. Like they're otherized very quickly. Like I think Ben starts calling them those things like right away. And it's like, there's never this connection really made that these are human beings or were human beings. And it seems like that was just kind of ignored. And it feels like something that was very intentional.
Yeah.
Well,
I liked it. I never buy the conflict in other zombie movies where someone's like, oh, they can still be saved. And they're like in rage zombie form, like Matt said. And it's like, I don't know if you would really think that.
Yeah, and even in this, like the Coopers in the basement thinking that Karen's not a zombie is their downfall. Barbara seeing Johnny through the window, that's her downfall. So for Ben, it was really, if it was conscious or not, like who knows how much like psychological separation he was going through, but him not seeing them as human is one of the things that made him last as long as he did.
Right, yeah.
So what was the downfall of, what was the young boy's name in the couple? Tom?
Yep, Tom and Judy.
Tom and Judy. What was the significance of his death? He was quite a likable character, I thought.
Oh,
they're the ones. Are they the ones that
they go out to the he goes out to try to get the gas with Ben.
Oh, they're the ones that die in the car explosion, right?
And I mean the reason he died was because Judy kind of ran out at the last minute, and then she got stuck in the car or something, and he went back to save her. But I don't know. Maybe did you guys see any particular significance in that death or?
I think I've always interpreted it as like the hubris of thinking you can outsmart it or get away from it. Like, because they were like, oh, we're going to go get the car, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and we're going to be okay. And it's like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you can never be okay.
So basically, his girlfriend's flaw was throwing herself into the situation and messing up the plan,
Right.
which was a bad idea. And then
this movie didn't have a very strong view of women, by the way.
It was 1968, yeah.
No.
Well, that's probably true, but I mean, and that is true. But my main takeaway walking away was like, this movie has a very poor view of humanity in general, because again, like, Ben is the quote unquote best character. It's pretty terrible, actually. Like he does a number of bad self-centered, selfish things, and I think that's why he survived. Like you could say you could say Tom dies because he goes back for his girlfriend rather than just abandoning her, which is his sin of caring for other people. Whereas Ben doesn't really care for anyone. He does though. He just
remember at the beginning when he saves Barbara, and then but the Coopers come out of the basement, or Mr. Cooper and Tom come out of the basement, and he berates them for not coming up to help her when they heard her scream.
Yeah,
so I think he is protecting people. It's just that he realizes, like, oh well, once the truck caught on fire, I'm going to go back and save myself because there's nothing I can do at this point.
Yeah, I guess. I'm mainly thinking about when he just shoots the guy.
Yeah, when he's won that fight, like he's won the fight. He has the gun drawn on him, and he just pulls the trigger because he's like, I'm not fucking around anymore.
Well, I mean, I think the guy basically tried to kill him, right? I mean, he was like, he told his wife to get in the cellar, and he had the gun, held on Ben, and in that situation, you can imagine from Ben's perspective, come on, we're like literally being overrun by zombies right now, and this is what you do. So he was clearly a danger to everyone.
Yeah, no, I get that. It's just and I don't want to fall back on tropes too much, but there's like the protagonist of the zombie movie tends to be the one that like is the one that's going to go above and beyond to not transform monstrous as the world transforms monstrous around you. And it seems like he kind of gave up on that at the end.
Well, that's always a theme in zombie movies, though, I think, is that conflict. Because it's kind of, they're always in some sense like a post-apocalyptic sort of, like, what would humans do if there was no sort of orderly civilization to guide them?
But yeah, in terms of like narrative structure, a lot of this goes back to Westerns, because Westerns were, Wild West. There was the frontier, which was wild. There was civilization creeping in there. And then the hero was almost always this character who kind of was able to straddle the two worlds. So it was a sheriff that kind of had some shady morals, or it was an outlaw that wanted to do good ultimately. So some of that borrows from that sort of history there, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, I think almost all zombie movies, all the ones I can think of, which are not that many, are kind of bottle stories in the sense that, the characters, they get into some kind of building, and then usually most of the action takes place in some secluded location, and the drama is actually between the characters and their different motivations and relationships and alliances and reactions to the desperate situation, and the zombies are just kind of the motivator for that, and that's certainly what this is.
You can't really imagine a zombie movie that only has one human character.
Yeah, although now that you've said that, I'm starting to.
Wait, what? You're just gonna write
like
one
a fun challenge.
Isn't that I Am Legend, kind of, sort of?
Yeah, sort of.
Maybe.
No, because then other people come in and they ruin it.
Yeah, which actually Romero said that he was inspired by I Am Legend, partially. Between that and EC Comics, like this definitely has shades of both of those in there.
Okay.
And he, like you said, he really didn't even consider these zombies, right? Like he specifically, he knew about the traditional zombie as it is in like voodoo folklore, but he viewed this as something entirely different.
He called them ghouls, and I think this is kind of what ghouls used to be known as, which are like undead things that eat people.
Yeah.
Yeah, because before this, it was the 30s and 40s. When you said zombie, you meant like the Haitian Caribbean voodoo.
Yeah.
And with those, they weren't dead. So this was really introducing undead for the first time. And
Yes.
they were controlled. They were, puppets for their master.
So, Dede, do you know the origin? Like, when did we start calling these undead things zombies?
I believe with Dawn of the Dead, that's where we started calling them zombies. They weren't called zombies with this. They were called ghouls. And it was just more done in retrospect. We looked back and called them that.
And that's
So
like
in the
10 years
original-
later, right?
Yeah, it's a significant portion of time. But it's also, other films came out past this where they used the word zombie, so I think that they just kind of looked back. So by the time we got to the Dawn of the Dead, that's when we were looking back and calling this zombie. But I think it was the transition was in between the two.
Okay.
So can y'all educate me a bit on the reaction to this movie when it came out?
Oh boy. So you guys have mentioned, I'm going to take this. You guys have mentioned a little bit the Roger Ebert's review for this.
Yeah.
So like a little bit of cinematic history. So it used to be the cinema would just run all day and you'd pay and you'd get to go in and sit for as long as you wanted to. You could watch something over and over again. They'd show newsreels in between it. That would be how movies are. They did have movie times, but it didn't really matter. You just kind of come and go. So the tradition was that they'd show kind of movies for kids during the day, and those were matinees, and parents would just drop their kids off at the cinema for however many hours and come pick them up later. The booker that bought this film initially for distribution booked it as a matinee. There are no parents in the theater. So initially, parents were dropping their kids off thinking they were going to watch like Looney Tunes or Snow White or something along those lines. And kids were watching, as someone was saying earlier, like very sustained shots of like ravenous undead people, some of them naked, just eating bones of other previously alive people. Horrifying. This is the screening that Roger Ebert sat in, surrounded by unattended children, all of them like weeping openly and terrified. So he thought this was really mean to kids and awful. So he wrote this horrible, horrible review talking about how this film has no soul. Like, it's just, you should never watch this film. It's awful. Given the circumstances, that totally makes sense. So this film very, very quickly was rushed out of theaters. No one saw it in 1968 in the US. Shortly thereafter, it actually went to France and played over there for a little while. The French recognized the cultural impact and what it was saying, and they were able to look at it almost like an art film. And they saw it as what we see kind of like indie cinema. It's just, it has a voice. It's not from a big machine of Hollywood. It has something to say. It won all these awards in 1969 in France, came back to the US, was re-released, and everyone loved it.
Yeah, it like made so much money, right?
Oh yeah.
I think they made the movie for $100,000, and I think it made $30 million, which is insane.
Romero made none of that.
Yeah. That's another because they screwed up. They screwed up the rights, right?
He changed the title last minute, and the title card had the copyright on it. So the film, as it was released, was not copyrighted. So that's why you can find super cheap DVDs of it even to this day. No one owns it.
Wow, that's weird.
Yeah.
Isn't that stupid? Yeah. And Criterion's putting out a new edition. Like, there are good editions you can get of it, but it is still one of those films. Like, if you go looking through a DVD bin, you can find it for like $5, no sweat.
I thought copyright was a lot more general than that, but I guess I don't know.
I think you actually have to say somewhere on your film that it's copyrighted, period, and even to have that argument, he just didn't.
Yeah.
Surprising.
Isn't it? Yeah, and it's one of the reasons that it's like Tom Savini remade it, and part of that was his way of trying to get some money back for his friend. Also, Tom Savini loves a vanity project, so that probably was there and there somewhere too. But there have been his attempt at getting back whatever he could throughout the years.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that is cool going back to the original Ebert showing, it's cool to think about, being in that theater. Not only was it like really graphically violent and upsetting to children, but it was very different than like your standard horror movie at the time, as I understand, which were mostly more romantic, and like maybe kids would go to monster movies, but they'd be fun and you'd like scream because it was a little bit spooky. But like in the end, the heroes lived and stuff. And what must have been really shocking as well is the ending, where the hero just gets shot in the head, and then it's over. And I don't think that was, maybe I'm wrong. I don't think that was something that would have really been done at all during that time period. That must have been a really interesting thing to experience for the first time.
Yeah. A lot of the like horror films before this were like, giant bugs because we're all afraid of Russians, sort of thing.
Right. Like it wasn't until the 70s, right, that our films really started getting like the ending is everyone loses because everything sucks. So it was a little ahead of its time in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to think like. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, just imagine all of the like, maybe some children were crying and some of them were just like blank faced with like this is a terrible world. People are terrible. There's no point to any of this.
Yeah.
They have to learn sometime.
Yeah.
I maybe this is just because I haven't seen it in a while. I had forgotten how much time we do spend with the sheriff and his posse, and like how deliberate that is. That we spend time with these guys that are basically round and in a similar way of Ben, but a little different. They have completely dehumanized the ghouls as well. They don't see them as people at all anymore, and that's of course why Ben ends up getting shot, because just another one to throw on the pile. And
they're setting up they're setting up the expectation that he's going to be saved. They're like, oh, just wait, maybe hopefully the posse will get there soon.
Nope.
Yeah, well, one element that I was thinking about, I didn't want to just write it off, but I definitely had a certain reaction to it, which was the explanation of it's radiation from a probe coming back from
from
deep
Venus
space. So first of all, that was one of those things that just strikes you as being like a throwback, like retro reference to 50s sci-fi, because it's so corny on its face. And then it reminded me of like any zombie movie where they tried to tell you where the zombies came from, like 28 Days Later. Everyone likes that movie, but makes fun of the infected with rage thing. So it's almost like this movie really goes all in on the like, yes, we're going to have several news broadcasts where we talk about the probe and the radiation and how the radiation is increasing. And I was like, okay, that's interesting, because it's almost like later throughout the history of film, they figured out that people don't care about where the zombies came from, actually. In fact, you should avoid talking about it because it just demystifies them. That was my reaction anyway. Maybe I'm being unfair on some level.
Yeah, I can't remember, Dede. Did the later Romero films go into that much detail on where they come from?
Okay, Romero was so hyper aware of how people were interpreting the beginning of the zombie outbreak in Night of the Living Dead that the very first scene of Dawn of the Dead, which is the next film, is a news broadcast with a broadcaster and a scientist. And the scientist is attempting to explain where this outbreak comes from. And the broadcaster is just like yelling at him, being like, well, how do you stop it? Like, it's so dismissive and so representative of the fact that like people want to know, but they don't want to do anything about it. Like, it doesn't matter at that point. Who cares if it was aliens or some sort of virus or like rage for monkeys? Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So this is when I open the infection can of worms, because Dede, who, guys, let's remember, wrote her master's thesis on this, says that if you are not dead and come back to life, it's not a zombie, right, Dede? I'm not mischaracterizing your argument here, am I?
Yes, I think the undead aspect of zombies is pivotal to categorizing them as zombies, because I know, Scott, you and I have had many discussions, or at least one that I shut down quite quickly, about...
It's hard to argue when you're just like, degree. I'm like, oh, yeah, I lose.
So I know that, like, 28 Days Later, which was just brought up, like, that's an infection film. They don't die, though they function just like zombies. I do not refer to them as zombie films. I get it. Like, they act just like the same. You kill them just the same and all that. But I think that there are enough films that kind of flirt with the idea of possibly bringing them back and uninfecting them. Whereas undead, you can't really like re-dead them and then undead them again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I did notice in this movie that the mechanics of the turning into a zombie thing is that basically the little girl had to die before she came back as a zombie. She'd been infected for a pretty long time. But my interpretation was like, when she finally died, then she came back to life as a zombie, instead of in other zombie movies where you get bit and then like you're just going to turn after, some standard amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, this one was just any recently dead person comes back, right? It doesn't matter how you died. It's just the radiation is causing you to come back to life. Yeah. So even if you die...
why didn't the lady upstairs, or was it because her head was broken? The lady upstairs who was dead when they got into the farmhouse?
Yeah, I'm guessing her brain was, because like you see her skull, so. Did they ever really explain what happened to that lady?
No, they just kind of, not at all. I was totally expecting her to come like back to life and come downstairs and attack them.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole movie.
That would have been awesome.
Speaking of nice, like, sort of Chekhov's gun, which is also a red herring, is when Ben like shuts that one door and you see there's another door behind it that he hasn't noticed.
Yeah. And
the camera just lingers on it for a second. And you're like, oh no. But then it turns out that there's actually people there. I thought that was a nice twist on what I was expecting.
I think that's a great segue to talk about the direction of this movie a little bit, because this is like, I think Romero and his little production company had made commercials before, but this is like the first thing Romero had fully directed. And I think it's like, it shows how good he is. Like, I think there's some shots in this movie that I think are really great. I think the opening where he just sticks the camera on a tripod and takes forever to show the car driving down the road. I don't know why that worked so well on me, but like, it's just like this, it's like this slow approaching thing that like is basically, the how the movie works, that the slow, inevitable approaching thing, and you start it with just a car on a road with ominous music behind it. I don't know. It just really worked really well on me.
And have you noticed the one giant object in that shot? It's an American flag.
Oh, yeah.
The symbolism is not subtle in this film.
No, it's not.
Good. Did he write this too?
Yes, he co-wrote it.
Okay.
But yeah, he was very involved with it. And it was the first thing he directed as an adult after he'd been a filmmaker, making commercials and doing newsreels and stuff like that. But he was one of those kids who was running around with a Super 8 camera all the time. Like, it wasn't like he just, when he turned like 30, he was like, I'm going to make a movie.
Yeah. One touch that I really liked, which is really minor, was it shows the brother like just playing with his driving gloves constantly. Like the driving gloves are a huge, icon of his character as you know him. And then when you see him at the end of the movie, he like clamps his hand on the door frame, and you see the driving glove, and that's how you know it's him. Really, like that's what cues your brain, Yeah. Because his face looks fairly different because he's dead now, but. You don't take but half a second to figure out that it's him because of the driving glove. I thought that was a nice way of communicating that.
Yeah, completely agree. And how good, like, they're coming to get you, Barbara, is like the best line ever. Like, he's just joking at the time, but like, whenever I think of that movie, that's the line I remember, always. Yeah. And it's like, the first 2 minutes of the movie, it doesn't really have any relevance to the rest of the film, but man, it creeps me out. I still get goosebumps just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's funny to recall that like it seems like they spend a lot of energy characterizing the brother before he's just unceremoniously killed, and that's an interesting misdirection too.
I noticed. Well, I knew he was going to die as soon as he said. As soon as Barbara said that you don't go to church very much anymore, and like, oh yeah, he's dead. Another cool part about that scene was when they were still at the grave, and you could see in the background the one suited zombie kind of limping around, and they don't call too much attention to it. And then the brother does.
Yeah, I mean, just like the car at the beginning, he's just like slowly walking closer to frame, and it's just there and inevitable. Yeah, it's great. All right.
I'm trying to think of there are a lot of really excellent shots. I'm just kind of trying to think of one to talk about, but there are shots that you even see in other zombie movies, in the sense of like the purpose of this shot is to contrast the people against the zombies in this particular way. So yeah.
Well, and I think the guerrilla filmmaking style, I think is perfect. I mean, like, I think Dede said that they specifically went out to try to make it look like this, like it was newsreel footage, and I think that's what it feels like throughout. Like it's very rough. It's like the camera is down in the dirt. Like there are scenes where the camera is almost placed on the floor. Like I think when Barbara's running near the beginning and she trips and falls, and that is shot from the camera on the ground looking up at her as she almost falls towards it. And it's just very like rough and violent. in how the camera moves as well. And I think like for someone who's never directed a feature before, I think that's incredible. That like the level of competence there is like kind of staggering for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the fact that he made the farmhouse feel so claustrophobic, like those rooms are small, but it feels like you can't escape them at any given point. Like you're stuck there with Ben and Barbara.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, like because like there's nothing outside the windows. Like that's they very rarely point the camera outside the window, and when they do, it's only ever to show like, oh, there's zombies right there. But otherwise, it's just like boarded up in blackness. And I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we talked a little about why they shot in black and white, but like I'm so glad the movie was in black and white. Like I think I can't imagine this even with the level of guerrilla filmmaking. Like if it had been in color, I think that part of it just takes away from it a little bit. And I think like they used a lot of tricks. Like the blood in this is just chocolate syrup, I think, and they couldn't have done that if it wasn't in black and white. And like, I think the movie would have suffered for it.
I actually watched it in color.
You did? What?
The version on Amazon Prime that I clicked on first was a colorized version of it.
Why did you do that?
I thought that was the only option. But it was fine. I mean, they recolored it. So I know they used like chocolate syrup for the blood, but they colored it red in the recolorized one.
Yeah, I had trouble finding the right version.
Because there's no copyrights. There's all the versions.
I got the digitally remastered version. I don't know if that is actually true or not. It just said the digitally remastered version.
So they very recently digitally remastered it, and then Criterion's actually putting it out, I believe, this month, maybe next month.
I think it's February 13th. Okay. It says, yeah. Perfect Valentine's Day present. Yay!
That's how to win my heart, FYI. But it's one of those things, like when they came out with the 40th anniversary of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like I saw that recreation of it, and it's beautiful and crisp and not at all how I want to watch that film.
Yeah. Because, like, I mean, like, the digitally remastered one I saw was still very clearly, like, you saw the film lines, you saw the cigarette burns. Like, it's very clearly on degraded film. So I don't know how much they remastered it. If the choice was to intentionally keep some of those things in, I don't know.
I do not know. I haven't seen it yet. I'm looking forward to seeing it, but I'll still go back to my old scratchy version probably if it looks pristine.
Yeah. I think it would take a little bit away. I see the version here, Michael, that you watched, Night of the Living Dead in color, and I kind of want to go watch it now and see. I don't know.
I don't think it really adds anything, but I mean, it was fine. It wasn't bad.
Mm-hmm.
This movie, was this like a shorter film, like in terms of runtime?
I think
it felt shorter.
It was 90 minutes, 96 minutes.
Yeah, it's about average.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, not maybe for today's movies, but yeah, about
yeah. I thought an average movie was 2.5 hours, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it felt very tight. Like I guess that's what I'm expressing is I other than that one monologue that I mentioned earlier.
Which one are you talking about? Which monologue?
I'm talking about when I'm terrible with names, but when the woman, or like first Ben tells his story about what happened to him, and then the woman tells her story, but then it becomes derailed, that she becomes hysterical, and just like the juxtaposition of the two. Like first of all, Ben's story I just felt goes on too long, and I was just kind of like, okay.
Oh man, I loved his story.
I mean, it was a decent story. I just maybe it could have been.
It was boring to just listen to, though. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, like objectively, it's an interesting story, but just the amount of talking in one run, like that. Honestly, that was the only part of the movie I would say I didn't enjoy the hell out of. So,
I mean,
there you go.
To me, the best part of her story is that about halfway through it, Ben doesn't care anymore, and he just stops listening and starts like trying to board up the windows, and like she's still going on and like losing it a little bit, and he's not even listening anymore.
But I think he did that on purpose so that she wouldn't freak out, because he's like, oh, I know where this is going, and then he's just like, don't think about that. We need to board up these windows.
Right. Yeah. Like, I regret even telling you my story now.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, this is definitely the rare film. Like, we're not used to seeing films that don't have subplots nowadays. Like, there aren't things where, like, the Coopers are about to get a divorce and Karen's the only reason they're still together and now she's on her deathbed. Like, we don't have any of that. Like, we have a little bit of, like, Barbara's hysteria and then her relationship with Johnny and then, like, going to the grandparents' house. But that's a setup. That's not necessarily, like, a subplot.
Yeah.
It's enough background that you can imagine them as real people without having to be explicitly told everything.
Yeah, I mean, there's some very, very, like, brief hints to the Coopers' not perfect marriage.
Right.
But yeah, that's not, you're absolutely right that it's not like a fully fleshed out arc at all. It's just, here's a little background on why they are seemingly fighting each other all the time. And that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. But what's funny is I sort of see them all as stereotypes, but then when I think about it, I realize that they're just stereotypes from the zombie movies. So they were probably really fresh and original if this was the first zombie movie you saw.
They weren't like super deep, but they were all like quickly characterized, kind of around like one bit of personality. But that it's what you should do. Like you don't have to have a super. You don't want them all to monologue about their background.
Yeah,
because that would be really boring.
Well, and I appreciate how structurally the film doled them out to us. Like, we're not thrown 6 characters all at once. Yeah. It's just like you start with Barbara, and then you add Ben, and then you add the 2 guys come up, and then a few more characters come, and so you get like a little bit of time to understand each character before you add some of the new characters in. So it's not like not everyone's lost in the shuffle. I like how that was done.
My only complaint about the characters is, again, Barbara, who I felt was a very unsympathetic character to start with, because I didn't really care what happened to her. And it wasn't until Ben showed up that I started like getting into the whole zombie survival thing. And she never really, she kind of disappears through the middle of the movie. Like, she's who they start the movie on. And then she's just kind of catatonic on the couch for the rest of it until the very end.
Yeah, she's not a great character. You're right.
It was a bit of a wasted opportunity, because like the thing with her brother showing up, I think could have been more effective if we'd gotten to know her a little bit more, and maybe she had become like a stronger person or something throughout the story. But that was the only really weak. And Tom's girlfriend, Judy, was also a pretty weak character. She was just like, okay, and then she ran out to the truck for no reason and got everyone killed.
Yeah, women, right? Like, they're just superfluous characters, right? Yeah.
I mean, it was really bad. Like, this movie did not, like, it seemed like Romero did not like women.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah. So I mean, Dede, do you think that was just he wasn't like thinking, and like, do you think it was intentional? He's crafting his female characters like this, or do you just think it was like he wasn't even bothering?
I think it had to be.
I think that, like, I think someone said this earlier, like, it's not that women are shown as bad. Everyone is bad in this film. Like, Ben is all business. And like you were saying, like, he just kind of listens to Barbara talking, and halfway through was like, oh, okay, Windows. Like, I don't really care what happened to you emotionally. Like, Cooper's like trying to just like show how big his balls are and is really not concerned about the best way to protect all of them. Like, I think none of the characters are people that you necessarily want to go grab a cup of coffee with, but they're all acting out like they're hyper masculine or hyper feminine, which is then shown as weakness, which is a major issue.
Yeah.
For me. Okay. Yeah, but I
go back to Tom though, because I thought he was like he was kind of like an example of a heroic, pure young character. I don't think there's anything to complain about with him.
Yeah, I agree with that, but he gets killed real quickly.
Well,
he does, but like while trying to save someone. So
and failing.
I did a beer with him, metaphorically.
I might get a beer with him and Judy. Maybe not Judy, but
and Ben, I really appreciated. I didn't get the I saw him as much more practical than cruel, because again, like the things where he's like, "What, you didn't come up and help this girl when she was screaming?" I thought him as being quite heroic, and he had to make some hard decisions. But
interesting.
But I thought him. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to exaggerate the difference between your take and my take on this movie. This may not be true, but this may very well be the first like zombie movie that I've watched since having kids, and I found it much easier to empathize with the piece of shit father character because because I could like imagine myself being like, I literally don't care about any of you except for my kid in this situation, and I would gladly like stab you in the back to save my kid, actually. And like that's kind of the fairly understandable mentality to me now, although it wouldn't have been before. So I thought that was an interesting little tidbit about myself that I learned.
Yeah, I thought he was reasonably relatable. I mean, like he was definitely conflicted, and like when he closed the door and Ben was trying to get in, he kind of like hesitated and was going to come help, and then he did come help board it up after Ben kicked the door in. So he was unlikable, but you could definitely understand his perspective, and he was right. It should be pointed out. If they'd all stayed in the cellar.
I noticed that too. I was like, oh my god. And then Ben is the one who goes in the cellar and survives.
Right.
I thought that was pretty intentionally.
I mean, I do agree that his problem is the hyper masculinity, where he basically treats his wife like shit and orders her around and is screaming at her the entire time. Like he's like, I understand his motivations behind things, but he's an asshole.
Yeah. It's another comment somebody made about the Barbara becoming catatonic being a kind of lame touch. I think that's another thing where, like, that's the sort of thing that would probably happen, like in real life in a situation like that. You'd have one person who just couldn't handle it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But like, what you as you evolve the genre, you learn like, oh, actually, this is bad filmmaking, bad storytelling, even though it's realistic. And then you kind of cut out those elements that didn't work. And
it's a very sort of Victorian notion of like a fainty catatonic response to trauma, I think.
I mean, some people do just shut down in response to trauma. Like that happens.
Maybe. I do think maybe Matt is right with it. It's just a really bad filmmaking decision.
It's just, it's just like they stop being a character at that point.
Right.
And that's unfortunate. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't do anything to help the film to have her just shut down. Like it's not that it doesn't make sense for her character. It's just like, why do we have to sit here and watch that?
Yeah. And everyone has to deal with it because they've there's things happening and they could use her help, but no.
Yeah. In terms of like, I can see like structurally in terms of Romero being like, now we're going to focus on Ben and Cooper fighting for a while and kind of forget there's another person up here.
And I think that maybe there was some evolution of how the story was going to go, because I know, and I don't remember exactly what I read now, but I think Ben's character became much more important than he was originally supposed to be, just based on like how good he acted and stuff. Is that right, Dede?
That sounds likely. I'm sure Romero said that at some point and then said something exact opposite of that at some point too.
Yeah, maybe.
But I mean, I think it's interesting, like someone brought this up a minute ago and I wanted to touch on it, is that none of these characters have arcs. No one learns anything.
Yeah.
Like, no, I mean, Barbara like goes catatonic and then comes back. But other than that, like, it's kind of like a testament to how little Romero possibly thinks of humanity is, so that no one has changed throughout this. Whereas like that's usually like a character arc and learning and overcoming emotional obstacles. Like that's the like cornerstone of so many really amazing, interesting character driven films. And that's just not what this is trying to be.
Yeah. And I think that's a testament to the filmmaking, that it is still propulsive, even though your characters are not changing at all. I think that's saying that the movie is still working on you in some kind of way.
This is an interesting thing to talk about, because a complaint I often have with modern movies is when the characters don't have an arc or they don't go anywhere. And you definitely feel that sometimes, but in this movie you don't really feel that. And is that because the seed for the conflict is like external, or why does it work in this case for them not to have arcs?
I think because it's not like, I don't think the movie's trying to tell a story. I think the movie's like, here are people trapped in a house. Let's see if they can survive. And it's that kind of like almost real world reporting that Dede was talking about, that is like, this is like, we're almost like looking in on something that's actually happening, and we're just observing like a reality television show. Here's 6 people in a house. Can they survive?
I guess that's the thing that draws you in, is like you're just rooting for them to survive. and it's not like they have some quest that they need to grow in order to accomplish, because it's definitely not satisfying when you have like a quest story and your character just starts out awesome and continues to be awesome and then obviously accomplishes the quest because he's awesome. But yeah, in this, it's just like people who really don't deserve to survive for any particular reason. It's just they happened to be here and they're doing their best to.
Yeah, and they don't survive. That's the whole thing. I think almost the lack of character arc, like we were talking about, like Ben versus Cooper. Like Cooper was right and Ben wouldn't admit that. And their stubbornness was their downfall. Like, this isn't a happy ending that they overcome the odds, like, somehow. Like, they all died.
Yeah.
Like, and if there were character arcs, maybe they would have survived.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I mean, maybe it could be argued that they died because they couldn't get along. Because that's kind of where it really fell apart, is when Mr. Cooper tried to grab the gun.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't helping, and then he ended up getting shot.
I think I have two comments here. First comment is maybe they did have arcs, but the arcs were just that they got worse and worse as the movie went along, rather than better. Like they didn't learn it. Like what Ben learned about himself is that he's willing to murder a man, and what Cooper learned about himself is that he's almost willing to shut the door on a man who's about to die, but then actually isn't, which is actually mildly redemptive of his character. That in the end he doesn't just shut the door on Ben. And everyone sort of gets their resolution. It's just not an arc. And then my second comment, unless anyone had a burning response to that, is like to get a little bit meta and reference something that Scott and I talked on our Daily Planet University podcast, is like, I think like the rule of storytelling is just like you have to effectively set something up and then effectively pay it off, or like subvert the expectation, which is a form of paying it off. And character arcs are just a way of setting something up and paying it off that you like appreciate instinctively. And this movie has so many other things going on in terms of setting up character relationships, setting up the external conflict, setting up the background of what's going to happen and why is this happening, and then paying all those things off at a good pace, that you don't actually miss the fact that there's no character arcs. It's just it's already well paced enough with what it has going on.
And really what's crucial to that is like the continual news coverage of the posse, because that's setting up like the whole ending of the film. If Ben had just died, like if someone had just shown up unprepared, like you didn't know they were coming and shot him, that wouldn't have been very satisfying. And if he just died from zombies, that wouldn't have been very satisfying. But because you were expecting, like, I'll just survive a little bit longer until the posse gets here, and you were expecting him to be okay at that point, then that's why it worked.
It's almost as if we are The Walking Dead. Sorry.
So why did he do that? Like, why didn't? I mean, I realize the movie is probably trying to make me feel this way, but like, why didn't he like stand up and go, "Hey, it's me. I'm a man. I'm alive. Hello."
He was like peeking through the window pretty cautiously.
Yeah, I think he didn't know what was out there. Like, he didn't know it. Like, he heard things and was going to check it out and was like looking through the window, and they just saw movement and said, "Oh, there's one. Take it out."
Okay.
If we know anything about armed policemen in this country, they're really willing to listen and talk to a black man who says that he's fine.
Yeah.
But he would have had his hands up, you see.
Oh, yeah, that they definitely would have stopped.
Oh, then no question, he would have been safe, and he would have been having hot cocoa within a half hour back at the police station.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, like, Romero clearly is quite aware of it. I wish I could, number one, meet you guys in person, but number two, sit down and watch the rest of his zombie saga with you. Because when it comes to Dawn of the Dead, they actually have a very similar posse out, like, rounding up zombies.
Yeah.
Except for it's over this song that's, like, the refrain in it is "I'm a man," and it's all these, like, good old boys with cowboy hats. And it's like, it's the extent of the performance of hypermasculinity shown as violent and just indiscriminately killing. It's really fascinating to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, this is, yeah.
If there was a message here, I'm glad it wasn't too heavy-handed, because you don't it's not necessarily the posse's fault. I mean, they're going through and killing all of the all of the zombies, and like, yeah, you're gonna be shooting anything you see probably because it doesn't look like anything survived. So you can totally buy it. It wasn't like it wasn't like obviously told you that they killed him because he was a black man, but it was well done because that does have historical. It does have importance because of what was going on at the time, and you can interpret it that way, or you can't.
Yeah. Or you can even interpret it as the guy, didn't hesitate as much as he might have if it was a white guy. I mean, it's interesting that's there to think about, at least.
You can do it. Yeah, you can think about that as much as you want, but it's not an obvious. It's not too heavy-handed.
Yeah, and I don't think the movie's trying to like explicitly blame any one thing for this. I think it's just like a systemic, endemic problem that it's commenting on.
Yeah, and also just like
sucks.
Yeah, that we suck. We all suck.
Yeah, Americans as a whole suck. But like to also recontextualize this a little bit, I know we talked a little bit about the fact that Romero says that it wasn't important that he cast a black man, which clearly it was. This is the year that like Martin Luther King was killed. Like This is not a year in which people had somehow forgotten about race issues in America. This is the year that the civil rights movement died on the streets. And to see this on screen, that wasn't a light thing. Like this wasn't someone being like, well, I'm sure the posse was okay. Like I can't imagine an audience of adults seeing this film and not being so struck by that.
Right. And that's what I think is so cool about story and film sometimes, that even if it's completely 100% true that he did not cast this guy with the idea that he was black in mind, and with this was his intended message with having the black guy get shot at the end of the movie. Like it doesn't matter because in the time that was seen that way, and that makes it important because you have the year that Martin Luther King is shot, you have a black man shot looking out of a window, and it's like that is, whether intentional or not, is impactful and sheds a light on our culture.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm never a big proponent of did the author mean this or not. The meaning that you draw from it is all for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm a strong believer in like semiotics and the reader. Where does the meaning lie in the film? Does it lie in the creator? Does it lie in the reader? And I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. I think that the filmmaker can make whatever they want, and I can interpret it however I want.
Yep, I completely agree.
Yeah, certainly helps when the filmmaker is willing to tell you what they intended. But
sometimes they go overboard. Darren Aronofsky.
I like it when they don't, when you don't know what because when they're trying to be too obvious with whatever point they're making, then it kind of takes you out of the movie because it's just like, oh, this was a movie created to make a point and not a thing I'm watching that's happening.
Man, Matt, we just listened to a whole podcast about that.
Yeah, we did.
About allegory. Yeah, there's a Tolkien podcast we're both listening to about how he hates allegory so much.
What?
It's for that exact reason.
Yeah.
I'm going to ignore that.
Wait, what?
Nothing. I've done enough interviews with filmmakers where I'm like, hey, let's talk about the symbolism of this. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, good talk. So it's, I think that filmmakers sometimes don't like discussing that because it's so personal to them. And I think also to a certain extent, they might not be aware of the baggage that they're bringing to things. And I might not be aware of the baggage that I'm bringing to watch something. And when those collide, it can get weird.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I know a lot of the best things that I've written and that's written probably as well. We didn't start off with some awesome idea with cool symbolism, but it just kind of happened by accident. And then you notice that, or like sometimes you don't notice that, and we'll read each other's stories and notice it for them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely, it's not always intentional, and that's fine. It's just like sometimes you stumble upon really cool ideas.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, Tolkien's point and what he said there was that, like, not that stories don't have meaning, but that he doesn't want to give explicit meaning to something because in his mind it ruins the ability for stories to develop their own meaning for other people. Like if he says, yes, The Lord of the Rings is an allegory for World War II, then that means thousands of people, millions of people can only see it that way and start trying to fit it in that instead of exploring what it means personally to you and how each person can do that differently. So yeah.
I like that.
I like that too. Not to get too far off track, but you guys mentioned Aronofsky, and Mother was one of the best films of last year.
I loved it. I absolutely.
It's amazing. It's amazing. But I had one friend who kind of watched it and was like, "Oh, this is a biblical allegory," and he in his head was like, "Check mark, I solved the puzzle," and then didn't pay attention to all the other stuff that was happening.
Yeah,
he's like, "No, they took his rib and they made a woman." I'm like, are you kidding me? There's so much more going on in the film.
Right.
This is not the film. This is not a one-note film. Night of the Living Dead might be a one-note film, but Mother, you can't read something, think that it's a puzzle box to be solved, and then check out once you think you've solved it.
Yep, completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think discovering the biblical allegory of that movie is one piece of the giant puzzle that is what that movie's trying to say, and that's why it's fun. I think that's why I really love that movie.
It didn't even occur to me while I was watching it. I was just so focused on the fact that there was a woman that no one was listening to, which is my experience in every day. So I was so emotionally registering with her that I had no idea that there was Bible stuff going on.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah. All right. So before we go to our vote, Dede, do you have one last closing statement you want to give? You don't have to, but if you have just one last final argument before the vote.
Yeah, of course. I'm always going to get the last word in.
All right. I figured.
I'm just listening to this conversation. First of all, I'm so happy that even if you guys don't vote this in, the fact that this was somehow a vehicle to have at least 2 more people in the world watch this film makes me particularly happy. I've heard something that you guys, all 3 of you, have said several times is we've seen this before. We see this over and over again. These are things that we've seen in other zombie films specifically, if not in the Walking Dead show. It feels cliche in Night of the Living Dead because people have been ripping it off for now. What is this? 50 years now? How old am I? Yeah, yep. 1968. Yeah, so 50 years. People have been going back to this film over and over again. And I think the fact that someone who has never seen this film before can watch it and everything feels familiar is incredibly powerful 50 years on. So keep it in mind.
Yeah. All right, Michael, let's start with you. What do you say?
Okay. Well, I've never been clear on exactly what the criteria is we're supposed to use to judge these.
It's supposed to be nebulous. That's the point.
But I'll say that I think it should be voted in because, one, of its sort of culturally historic significance as the originator of zombie movies. And it basically, like we said previously, doesn't just start the idea, but it kind of has all of the ideas that we're still using in it. So for that reason, it's pretty important. And also it is more effective than a lot of zombie movies since it's obviously not as polished and it can be kind of corny, but it's a pretty tight movie that has characters that are just effective enough that you see them as people and are interested. And it's got an ending that is not what you're expecting, but works pretty well. I there's not very many movies where the main character just sort of randomly dies at the end, where I think that's a good call, and it was a good call here because it wasn't random, it was set up, and it kind of I don't know, it made it work. So I think it was. I think for all those reasons, it should be admitted. All
right. Matt, how about you?
Yes, I also think it should be. I agree with everything Michael just said. And I would definitely recommend it because it's just a good movie on its own merits. Like even set aside from the historical value of it, it's good storytelling, and it's really neat to watch this story and have it feel organic, where you've watched some version of this story before and had it feel like, oh, this is a zombie movie. Like this is, instance number 374 of this genre. This just felt like something coming out of someone's imagination raw. And that was cool, and that was new, and that was refreshing. And I've been thinking about this movie since I watched it, which is always a sign that it was a good movie. And like we've been talking about throughout this discussion, there's all kinds of meaning that you can draw out of it, none of which is obvious, and that makes it even more fun to think about because you don't get that feeling of like, oh, I've solved the puzzle. It's more like the more you think about it, the more you think maybe you figured something out, but you're not sure, and that just makes you want to think about it more. So yes, I want it in the collection.
Yeah. Okay, so my vote doesn't really matter now, but I'll give it anyway because, damn it, I want to. Yeah, one of the things like Michael's talking about, like what the criteria of getting in, and I think we were intentionally kind of vague on this because I don't want it to be movies checking a checkbox to get into this collection. One of the things we did say was we don't want it to be just because of the movie's historical importance. Like if it's a super historically important movie, but is also kind of a bad movie, then it shouldn't get in. Well, I don't agree with that, but
what did say?
But like, so this movie, yes, is like super historically important. Like it created this genre. It did so many things. It kind of created this whole new way of telling these stories, and it's still also just a really powerful, impactful movie. Like that you hear all these stories of older films. Like I watch horror movies all the time. I don't get that scared anymore. They don't affect me as much because I've seen so many things. So for a movie that's 50 years old to have that effect on me still, to give me goosebumps, to get me kind of uncomfortable and scared, I think is incredible. And yes, this movie absolutely deserves to be in. Even though my vote doesn't matter, I happily give it. So that's 3-0, and Night of the Living Dead is in the Criterion Collection. Congrats, Dede.
Thank you. You guys have done good work here.
Yeah. All right. So, so now, Dede, if you want to, the next time we do this, you will take Michael's spot on the council and get to vote for whoever is bringing the next movie. You don't have to.
I love judging things.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. All right. So I think that's all we have for this month. We call this a monthly show, and I'm just really bad at scheduling them. so it's not really a monthly show. So maybe I'm just going to start calling it a whenever we have time to do it show. Because like getting 4 people scheduled at the same time and having a rotating guest list every single time is tough. But I want to keep doing this because I think it's a lot of fun. And so we won't say we'll be back next month, but we'll be back sometime in the future.
Yeah. Sometime soon.
Yeah. And always make sure you check out the Daily Planet Films Twitter at Daily Planet Films, because we do announce who the challenger is and what film they're nominating as soon as we know. So those of you listening along at home can watch it in preparation for this, because as you've noticed here, we go full spoilers with these things. We can't really dive into and discuss these movies without going full spoilers. So watch it before you listen to this. I guess I should have said that at the beginning of the episode, but oh well. So we'll be back next week with another episode of the Daily Planet podcast. Not sure what we're doing, Matt, yet. Don't know, but we'll be back.
Yeah. But yeah, you can find this and all our other podcasts that we do and more over on dailyplanetfilms.com. We're trying a whole bunch of new shows this year, especially early on, running some pilots. So make sure you come and check them out.
Yeah, and if you like what we do here and want to see more of it, head on over to patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms and consider donating $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. We do really appreciate all your continued support. Dede, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Can you tell the people at home where they can find your writing and your opinions and stuff?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I write for Roomwork magazine, which is in print, which means you have to go to a bookstore and buy it physically or subscribe, which is delightful because paper is great. You can also find me at birthmoviesdeath.com. You can find me at filmthrills.com, but I always post links to all of my stuff that's available online on my Twitter, which is DEDECRIM, Dede Crimm.
All right, cool. Matt, you're on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter at Mordenmail.
Which is hard to spell.
Which is spelled just like how it sounds.
Yeah. Okay. Michael, you are not exist on the internet because
you'll never find me.
Yeah, exactly. I am also on Twitter at ScottDaly85. It's DALY, and that's all we have. So we see you all next week.
This discussion is terminated. The decision of the council is final.